Cruel Tech CEO got call from divorced wife. Our son needs a donor. Only your blood can save him. He ran without. Her voice cracked on the last word, and something inside Derek's chest cracked with it. He stood abruptly, sending his chair rolling backward into the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his kingdom. What would you do if the child you denied was dying, and you were his only hope? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. He was in the middle of firing half his staff when his phone buzzed with a call that would destroy everything he'd built, starting with a lie he'd been living for 5 years. Have you ever gotten a call that made your blood run cold? A voice from your past that you never wanted to hear again? The kind that makes your hands shake before you even answer? Derek Matthews had built his empire on control. Every variable calculated, every risk measured, every emotion locked away behind titanium walls. His San Francisco office sat 40 floors above the chaos of ordinary lives, glass and steel testament to a man who had conquered Silicon Valley by age 32. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as he delivered termination notices like a surgeon removing tumors. Clean, precise, without hesitation. Effective immediately, his voice cut through mahogany and fear. Positions in marketing, customer service, and product development will be eliminated. Severance packages are on the table. 23 people. 23 lives disrupted because quarterly projections showed red instead of black. Derek felt nothing. Feeling was weakness, and weakness killed companies faster than bad code. And his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost declined. Almost, but something about the timing felt wrong. Like the universe holding its breath. Derek Matthews. Silence. Then breathing, shaky and desperate. Derek, it's me. His blood turned to ice water. 5 years of careful construction crumbled with 2 words. Ariel, the name he'd buried so deep that hearing it felt like resurrection and death simultaneously. Our son needs a blood donor. It's life or death. Only you can save him. The conference room disappeared. 23 terminated employees faded into background noise. His carefully constructed world tilted on its axis as memories crashed through his defenses. Soft brown skin against hotel sheets. Whispered promises in Atlanta moonlight. The pregnancy test that sent him running like a coward. I don't have a son, he heard himself say, the lie tasting like poison. You do, and he's dying. Her voice cracked on the last word, and something inside Derek's chest cracked with it. He stood abruptly, sending his chair rolling backward into the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his kingdom. Below, San Francisco moved like ants, unaware that their tech king was about to fall. Where? Sacramento General. Pediatric ICU. Room 314. The line went dead. Derek stared at his phone, aware that every eye in the room was watching their untouchable CEO transform into something human and breakable. His assistant knocked, entered without permission, something she'd never done in 4 years. Sir, there are reporters outside asking about a child in Sacramento. How should I respond? The walls closed in. Media vultures circling before the blood even hit the water. Someone had talked. Someone always talked. Cancel everything, he said, grabbing his jacket. Everything. He left a $7 million investor meeting without explanation, walked past confused executives like they were ghosts, and headed for the elevator that would take him down from his tower and back to Earth. As the doors closed, Derek caught his reflection in polished steel. A man who had spent 5 years denying the existence of his own child, who had returned letters unopened, who had built walls so high that love couldn't scale them. Now that child was dying, and Derek was the only one who could save him. The elevator descended, carrying him toward a reckoning 5 years in the making. What would you do if the child you denied was dying, and you were his only hope? If your past came calling when you thought you'd buried it forever? Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever had to face consequences you spent years avoiding. But this was just the beginning, because what Derek didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the child in room 314 had been writing letters for years. Letters that contained secrets. Letters that could destroy everything Derek had built. starting with the truth about who that boy's father really was. 6 hours of highway stretched between Silicon Valley and Sacramento. 6 hours for a man to remember exactly why he'd spent 5 years running from the truth. Have you ever driven towards something that terrified you more than death itself? When every mile felt like a countdown to Judgment Day. Interstate 5 became Derek's confession booth, his Tesla eating up asphalt between his billion-dollar life and the wreckage he'd left behind. The speedometer climbed past legal limits, but traffic laws felt irrelevant when your sins were catching up at the speed of guilt. His phone buzzed relentlessly, investors demanding explanations, board members panicking about media attention, stock prices fluctuating with each news alert. But all Derek could hear was Ariel's voice, raw with desperation. He's dying. Miles blurred past as memories ambushed him. Atlanta, 2018. Tech conference at the Georgia World Congress Center. He'd been 27, hungry, and stupid enough to believe he could have it all. The presentation had gone perfectly. Investors throwing money at his blockchain startup like confetti. He was riding high on adrenaline and champagne when she walked into the hotel bar. Ariel Johnson, nursing student from Emory, working part-time catering to pay for school. She moved through the crowd like she owned every room she entered, serving drinks to tech bros who looked right through her. But when their eyes met across a sea of suits and egos, something shifted in the universe. "You're the blockchain guy," she'd said, approaching his table with confidence that made his pulse stutter. "You're the most beautiful woman in this room," he'd replied, then immediately regretted the cliché. She laughed, not polite networking laughter, but something real and bright that cut through the artificial atmosphere. "That's a terrible pickup line. I'm better with code than conversation. Good thing I like challenges." They talked until the bar closed, about everything and nothing. Her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse. His vision of disrupting traditional banking. The way Atlanta summers made everything feel possible. She challenged his ideas, called out his assumptions, made him think beyond algorithms and profit margins. When she pressed her key card into his palm at 2 a.m., Derek felt something he'd never experienced. The fear of not being enough for someone who mattered. Her hotel room was identical to his, standard corporate accommodation. But when she turned to face him, the space transformed into something sacred. Her hands moved to his shirt buttons with deliberate slowness, eyes never leaving his face. "What are you afraid of?" she whispered against his neck. Everything, he thought but didn't say. Failing. Being ordinary. Caring too much about someone who could leave. Instead, he showed her. Hands mapping skin like memorizing scripture. Kisses that tasted like promises he didn't know how to keep. She moved beneath him with a confidence that unraveled his carefully constructed control, whispering his name like it meant something more than the letters on his business cards. Afterward, she traced patterns on his chest with fingers that felt like home. "I want to build something with you," she said, voice soft with possibility. "Not just a company or career. Something that lasts." He kissed her instead of answering, already knowing he was too broken for forever. 3 days later, his startup got acquired. $50 million. Instant tech royalty. The kind of success that came with private jets and penthouse views and the crushing weight of maintaining perfection. 3 weeks later, Ariel called with news that changed everything. "I'm pregnant." The highway stretched endlessly ahead as Derek remembered his response. The moment that defined the next 5 years of his life. "I can't do this. I'm not ready. We barely know each other. But we could get to know each other. We could try. I won't be trapped by an accident." The silence that followed lasted forever. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a dignity that made his cruelty even more shameful. "This isn't an accident, Derek. This is a choice. And you're making yours." He made it. Chose his company over family. His image over love. His fear over courage. Moved to San Francisco. Married a venture capitalist daughter. Built an empire on the foundation of denial. For 5 years, he convinced himself he'd made the right choice. That Ariel was better off without him. That the child, his child, would have a better life without a father who cared more about stock options and soccer games. Now that child was dying, and Derek was driving toward the reckoning he'd spent half a decade avoiding. His GPS announced destination ahead. Sacramento General Hospital loomed like a judgment, all concrete and glass and fluorescent promises. The parking garage smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. As he stepped out of his Tesla, muscle memory from 5 years ago kicked in. This was where he ran, where he chose comfort over courage, success over love, himself over everyone else. But not this time. Through the lobby windows, he could see her silhouette, still beautiful, still strong, still everything he'd been too cowardly to fight for. When she turned, her eyes held something new, the exhaustion that comes from carrying the world alone. She was walking toward him now, and Derek realized with crystal clarity that the next few minutes would either redeem the last 5 years or damn him forever. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to face someone you hurt? Someone you abandoned when they needed you most? How do you find the courage to walk through those doors? Because what Derek was about to discover would shake him to his core. The child waiting in room 314 had his eyes, his stubborn jawline, and secrets that could destroy everything Derek had built on the foundation of lies. 5 years of silence ended with 4 words that cut deeper than any insult. Thank you for coming. What would you say to someone who abandoned you at your lowest moment? How do you face the person who chose their comfort over your crisis? The pediatric ICU lobby felt like purgatory, beige walls, artificial plants, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look half dead. Families clustered in uncomfortable chairs, holding on to hope and coffee cups with equal desperation. This was where miracles and heartbreak lived side by side, separated by nothing but thin walls and thinner prayers. Ariel looked like she'd been living in this limbo for weeks. Her scrubs hung loose on a frame that had carried too much alone for too long. Hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow made her more beautiful than any style perfection he remembered. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, still warm brown, still intelligent, but haunted by something that made his chest tighten with guilt. She moved toward him with measured steps, like approaching a dangerous animal. Professional composure covering years of struggle, pain, and the kind of strength that comes from being the only parent in the room when your child stops breathing. Derek, her voice carried no warmth, no anger, just exhausted acknowledgement. Thank you for coming. Those words hit harder than screaming would have. Gratitude from someone he'd failed so completely that basic human decency felt like heroism. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow bridge 5 years of silence with words that didn't exist. Ariel, I don't. She held up a hand, the gesture gentle but final. Not here. Not yet. We have more important things to focus on. She turned toward the ICU doors, expecting him to follow. He did, like a man walking toward his own execution. The pediatric ward buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses moving with practiced efficiency. Monitors beeping in rhythm with small hearts fighting to keep beating. The antiseptic smell of hope and desperation mixing in recycled air. Derek felt like an intruder in this world of sick children and superhero parents. Before you meet him, Ariel said, stopping outside room 314, you need to understand something. Marcus isn't angry with you. He should be, but he isn't. He's been asking about you since he could talk. I try to protect him from the truth, but she trailed off, studying his face like she was seeing him for the first time in 5 years. Really seeing him. The success, the designer clothes, the careful grooming that screamed money and power. Everything she'd never had access to while raising their son alone. You look good, she said finally. Success suits you. The observation stung because it was true. He did look good. Successful. Like a man who'd made all the right choices. Like someone who'd never walked away from a pregnant woman because commitment felt like a cage. How long has he been sick? The symptoms started 6 months ago. Fatigue, bruising, infections that wouldn't heal. I thought it was just kids get sick, you know? But then the blood work came back and everything changed. Her voice stayed clinical, detached, the way medical professionals talked about tragedy to keep from drowning in it. But he caught the tremor, The moment where her composure cracked just enough to show the terror underneath. What exactly is wrong with him? Severe aplastic anemia. His bone marrow isn't producing enough blood cells. Without treatment, without a match donor. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. And you think I'm a match? You're his father, Derek. Of course you're a match. The certainty in her voice should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like another weight added to an already crushing load of guilt. She'd known. For 5 years. She'd known exactly who Marcus's father was, had raised him alone with that knowledge, had carried the burden of his denial without ever doubting the truth. Through the partially open door, he could hear the soft beeping of medical equipment, keeping someone small and precious alive. His son, the child he denied, ignored, erased from his carefully constructed life. Does he know? About me? Ariel's smile was sad and proud simultaneously. He figured it out himself. Started following your company online when he was 8. Smart kid. Gets that from you, unfortunately. He knows you returned his letters unopened. Knows you moved to California and got married. Knows you built an empire while his mother worked double shifts to keep the lights on. Each word was a knife twist, delivered without malice, but landing with surgical precision. This was what accountability felt like. Not anger or accusations, but the simple presentation of facts that couldn't be denied or rationalized away. Ariel, he wrote you letters, Derek. Dozens of them. School pictures, report cards, drawings of spaceships and buildings he wanted to show his dad. I made him stop when you kept sending them back. Do you know what that does to a kid? Watching his mother cry over return mail. Now there was heat in her voice, 5 years of suppressed fury leaking through professional control. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, still the same coconut scent he remembered from Atlanta hotel rooms. But here's the thing that's going to break your heart, Derek. He still believes in you. Still thinks there's some good reason why his father disappeared. Still hopes that maybe, someday, you'll want to know him. The proximity was doing things to his nervous system that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with muscle memory. The way she tilted her head when she was angry. The gold flecks in her brown eyes that appeared when she was passionate about something. The curve of her neck that he'd once kissed while she whispered his name like a prayer. Inappropriate thoughts in a pediatric ICU, but his body didn't care about appropriate. 5 years of marriage to someone who felt like a business arrangement, and 30 seconds with Ariel reminded him what it felt like to actually want someone. I need to see him, he said, voice rougher than intended. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Room 314. But Derek, if you're going to break his heart, do it now. Don't let him hope just to disappoint him again. She pushed open the door, and Derek stepped into the room that would change everything. The boy in the hospital bed had his jawline, his stubborn cowlick, his dark eyes that tracked movement with intelligence that made adults uncomfortable. Marcus was small for 10, made smaller by the medical equipment surrounding him like technological armor. But when he looked up from the book in his lap, Derek saw himself at that age, curious, determined, achingly hopeful. Are you really my dad? Marcus asked, voice barely above a whisper, but carrying more weight than any question Derek had ever been asked. Do you know someone whose very existence challenges everything you thought you knew about yourself? Someone whose innocence exposes your worst failures? Tell me in the comments how you faced that mirror. Because what Derek was about to discover, hidden in a shoebox under his son's hospital bed, would expose secrets that could destroy not just his company, but everything he thought he knew about the child he'd spent 5 years denying. The child in the hospital bed had his jawline, his stubborn cowlick, and a shoebox full of returned letters that could destroy everything Derek had built. Have you ever met someone who saw right through your lies before you even told them? Someone whose innocence made your worst decisions impossible to hide from? Marcus lay propped against white pillows that made his brown skin look too pale, for lines running from arms that seemed too thin for a 10-year-old who should have been playing soccer instead of fighting for every breath. But his eyes, Derek's own dark brown eyes, held an intelligence that made grown men squirm in boardrooms. Are you really my dad? The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Derek's throat closed. 5 years of denial warring with the undeniable evidence staring back at him. The boy had his nose, his stubborn cowlick, the same way of tilting his head when processing information. But more than physical resemblance, there was something deeper, a recognition that bypassed logic and went straight to DNA. Yes, I think so. I know so. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing homework instead of paternity. I wrote you letters. Mom made me stop when you kept sending them back. The words hit like physical blows. Derek glanced at Ariel, who stood by the window with her arms crossed, watching this reunion with the careful attention of someone ready to protect her child from further damage. Letters. Marcus reached under his bed, movements careful around the 4 lines, and produced a shoebox that had seen better days. Nike sneakers, size 3, repurposed into a treasure chest of rejection. He lifted the lid with reverent hands, revealing dozens of envelopes, some in child's handwriting, others more mature, all stamped "Return to Sender" in red ink that looked like blood. I started writing when I was 6, Marcus explained, pulling out school pictures with corners bent from handling. Mom said you were busy building important things, but I thought maybe you want to see my report cards. Or my science fair project about renewable energy. I got first place. Each envelope was a small knife to Derek's chest. Birthday cards never opened. School photos never seen. A child's attempts at connection systematically rejected by automated corporate mail systems. This one's from when I lost my first tooth. Marcus continued, handling the letters like sacred texts. And this one's when I learned to ride a bike. Mom said you probably had your own bike when you were little, so maybe you'd remember what it felt like. Derek couldn't breathe. The casual cruelty of his neglect laid out in chronological order, measured in small hands and careful penmanship that grew more sophisticated with each passing year. I used to get mad, Marcus admitted, when they came back. But Mom explained that important people get lots of mail, and maybe yours just got lost in the pile. She said you were probably helping lots of people with your computers, and that was important too. Ariel made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and turned toward the window. Even now, even after everything, she'd protected Derek's image in their son's eyes, made excuses for inexcusable behavior. But this one's different, Marcus continued, pulling out an envelope marked urgent, about Dad's company, in careful 10-year-old handwriting. I wasn't going to send it because Mom said we shouldn't bother you anymore. But then I got sick and I thought maybe it was important enough. Derek reached for the envelope with hands that shook slightly, his name and San Francisco address written in his son's careful script, along with a note, for when Dad is ready to know the truth about his medicine company. What truth, Marcus? The boy looked at his mother, some silent communication passing between them. Ariel moved closer to the bed, her hand resting protectively on Marcus's shoulder. Tell him, baby. He needs to know. Marcus took a deep breath that made the monitors beep faster. I did a report for school about rare diseases. Mine's called aplastic anemia. It means my bone marrow doesn't make enough blood cells. I was researching treatments when I found something weird. He pulled out a tablet, hospital provided for patient entertainment, and navigated to a bookmark with the ease of a digital native. The screen showed a news article from 2 years ago. Biogenesis Labs acquired by Matthews Tech Solutions for $200 million. That's your company, right? Marcus asked, looking up at Derek with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. Yes, but Biogenesis was working on treatments for blood disorders, including mine. They had trials starting, real hope for kids like me. But after you bought them, all the research stopped. The room went dead, quiet except for the steady beeping of machines. Derek stared at the screen, memory flooding back. The acquisition had been purely financial. Biogenesis had valuable patents, cutting-edge facilities, tax advantages. The research pipeline was secondary, and when the trials proved expensive and uncertain, they'd been quietly shelved. The weird part, Marcus continued, voice getting stronger as he warmed to his topic, is that the research they stopped could have helped me, could have helped lots of kids. But stopping it saved your company about $50 million in development costs. Ariel's hand tightened on Marcus's shoulder. Her voice was carefully controlled. He figured this out himself. Derek, 10 years old, and he connected dots that your lawyers thought they'd buried. How did you? I'm smart, Marcus said simply. And I had time. Lots of time in hospitals, reading about my disease, learning about the companies that make medicines. When I realized my dad owned the company that could have saved me, I thought maybe that was important to know. The weight of it crashed down like a building collapse. His son, the child he denied and ignored, was dying from a condition that Derek's own company could have treated. The research existed, the trials were planned, the cure was possible. But profit margins and risk assessments had seemed more important than abstract children with rare diseases. Now, one of those abstract children was his own son. Marcus, I didn't know. I know you didn't know about me, the boy interrupted gently. But you knew about kids like me. The research reports mentioned hundreds of us. Thousands, maybe. Derek sank into the chair beside the bed, legs suddenly unreliable. His empire built on calculated risks and cold decisions was crumbling under the weight of one child's innocence and intelligence. What else is in the letters? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Marcus smiled, the first real smile since Derek had entered the room. Mostly just kid stuff. Stories about school, friends, things I was learning. I thought maybe you'd want to know about me, even if you couldn't be here. The simple hope in that statement destroyed something inside Derek's chest. This child had spent 4 years writing to a father who never responded, never acknowledged his existence, never even opened the envelopes to see what treasures they contained. And yet Marcus still smiled, still hoped, still believed in the possibility of connection. Would you like me to read them to you? Marcus asked shyly. Some of them are pretty funny. I drew pictures too. Before Derek could answer, alarm started screaming. Marcus's heart monitor spiked, then flattened, then spiked again. The boy's eyes rolled back as a small body convulsed against white sheets. Nurses rushed in as Ariel shouted medical terms that meant nothing to Derek, but everything to the people trying to save his son's life. In the chaos of emergency procedures and barked orders, Marcus's weak voice cut through the noise. The letter, Dad, read the letter before it's too late. Have you ever held something that could change everything? Information that could save someone you love but destroy everything you've built? Tell me in the comments what you would choose, truth or comfort, courage or safety. Because the letter in Derek's hands contained more than a child's research project. It contained evidence of corporate negligence, buried trials, and decisions that put profit over patience. Reading it would expose the truth that could save Marcus's life and end Derek's career forever. The letter contained 3 things: a child's drawing, a newspaper clipping, and information that could send Derek to prison for corporate fraud. What would you do if your 10-year-old son discovered secrets that your team of lawyers spent millions trying to hide? When innocence exposes corruption in ways that experience never could. The ICU family lounge became their war room at 3 a.m. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects while vending machines hummed their mechanical lullabies. Marcus had stabilized, for now, but the doctors' faces carried the kind of careful optimism that meant they were running out of options. Derek sat across from Ariel at a plastic table scarred by years of worried families. The letter spread between them like evidence at a crime scene. His son's careful handwriting mixed with printed research, newspaper clippings, and a crayon drawing of a father and son building something together, labeled Dad and Me Making Medicine for Sick Kids. The innocence of that drawing made what he was reading even more damning. Jesus Christ, he whispered, scanning pages of research that Marcus had somehow compiled from public records, patent filings, and news articles. How'd he get all this? He's been working on it for 2 years, Ariel said, her voice flat with exhaustion. Started as a school project about rare diseases. Became something else when he realized his own father owned the company that could save his life. The evidence was laid out with the logic of a child who believed in justice, uncompromised by adult understanding of legal gray areas and corporate necessities. Biogenesis Labs had been developing treatments for aplastic anemia and 6 other rare blood disorders. Phase 2 trials were scheduled to begin when Matthews Tech Solutions acquired the company. Within 6 months, all research had been terminated. The trials were expensive, Derek said, though the excuse sounded hollow even to him. Uncertain outcomes, limited market potential. Limited market potential? Ariel's voice cracked like a whip. Is that what you call my son? Limited market potential? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. That's how your world works, isn't it? Cost-benefit analysis on human lives. Risk assessment on children's futures. She was right, and they both knew it. The acquisition had been purely financial. Biogenesis owned valuable patents for artificial intelligence applications in drug development. The actual drug development was secondary, expensive overhead that interfered with profit margins. But here's what your lawyers didn't know, Ariel continued, pulling out another document from Marcus's collection. One of the researchers kept working. Dr. Sarah Chun, former head of pediatric trials at Biogenesis. She continued the research on her own time, funded it herself after you shut down her lab. Derek scanned the medical paper, dense scientific language that he couldn't fully understand but recognized as legitimate research published in a peer-reviewed journal. Treatment protocols for aplastic anemia showing remarkable success rates in preliminary trials. She proved it works, Ariel said simply. The treatment your company buried. It works, Derek. 93% success rate in early trials. Kids like Marcus going from dying to thriving in 6 months. Why didn't you contact her? I did. 3 months ago, when Marcus got worse. Dr. Chun wants to help, but she needs approval for expanded trials. Needs funding for proper facilities. Needs a corporate sponsor willing to take the risk. The pieces click together with devastating clarity. She needs someone with the resources to restart what we shut down. She needs you to fix what you broke. They sat in silence, the weight of corporate decisions made in sterile boardrooms now personalized in the form of a dying child. Derek's phone buzzed with messages. Investors panicking about media attention, board members demanding explanations, stock prices fluctuating with each news alert. His empire built on calculated risks was crumbling because he'd calculated wrong. Assumed that abstract children with rare diseases would stay abstract forever. There's more, Ariel said quietly, pulling out the final page of Marcus's research. Your son isn't just smart, Derek. He's brilliant. Look at this. The page showed financial projections in a 10-year-old's handwriting, estimates of development costs, market potential, and profit margins for rare disease treatments. The numbers were remarkably accurate, showing the kind of analytical thinking that built tech empires. He figured out that helping kids like him would actually be profitable, Ariel explained. Long-term patents, government incentives, international markets. Your company could make more money saving lives than burying research. Derek stared at his son's calculations, seeing his own mind reflected in careful columns and logical conclusions. Marcus had inherited more than his jawline and stubborn cowlick. He'd inherited the ability to see patterns, analyze systems, solve problems that stumped adults. Why? He asked finally. Why compile all this? What was his plan? Ariel's smile was sad and proud simultaneously. He wanted to help you make better decisions. Thought maybe if he showed you the numbers, proved that saving lives could be good business, you might want to know him. Might be proud of him for figuring out how to fix what was broken. The devastating simplicity of a child's logic. Marcus had discovered corporate malfeasance and responded not with anger or accusations, but with solutions. Had found a way to align profit with purpose, business with humanity. At 10 years old, he was already better at leadership than his father had ever been. But there's a problem, Ariel continued, checking her phone as new messages arrived. Dr. Chun called 20 minutes ago. She's being pressured to stop her research. Patent challenges, funding threats, legal intimidation. Someone powerful wants her work buried permanently. Who? Someone who knows you're here. Someone who knows about Marcus. Someone who's very afraid of what happens if this information goes public. Derek's blood went cold. His phone lit up with an incoming call. Richard Blackstone, chairman of his board of directors and the man who'd orchestrated the Biogenesis acquisition. Don't answer it, Ariel said, but Derek was already declining the call. Another buzz. Text message from an unknown number. Saw the news about your family reunion. Suggest you remember your obligations to shareholders before making any emotional decisions. Some secrets are better left buried. RB. He knows, Derek said, showing Ariel the message. They all know. Outside, dawn was breaking over Sacramento, but the light felt ominous rather than hopeful. Media vans were gathering in the hospital parking lot, drawn by leaks and rumors about Silicon Valley royalty and hidden children and corporate scandals that made for perfect headlines. What are you going to do? Ariel asked. Before Derek could answer, his phone rang again. This time the caller ID made his stomach drop. Dr. Sarah Chun. Mr. Matthews? I think we need to talk. Immediately. They're trying to shut down my research, and I think your son's life depends on what you decide in the next 24 hours. Tell me in the comments, what would you choose? Your empire or your son? Your reputation or the right thing? When the whole world is watching, how do you find the courage to do what matters? Because what Derek was about to discover would force him to choose between everything he'd built and everyone he'd failed. And in 24 hours, the whole world would know which mattered more, Silicon Valley success or father's redemption. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the hospital parking garage at 6 a.m. with evidence that could save Marcus's life or destroy them all trying. Have you ever held information so dangerous that knowing it felt like holding a loaded gun? When the truth becomes a weapon that could kill everything you've built. The concrete parking garage echoed with their footsteps as Dr. Chun led Derek and Ariel to her car, a beat-up Honda that looked nothing like the luxury vehicles Derek was used to seeing in corporate meetings. But the woman behind the wheel had the kind of quiet intensity that made billion-dollar executives listen. 15 minutes, she said, handing them each a thick folder. That's all the time we have before they track my location. Read fast. Dr. Chun looked exactly like someone who'd sacrificed everything for principle. Tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, clothes that prioritized function over fashion. But when she spoke about her research, something fierce and beautiful transformed her face. Your son is dying because I wasn't brave enough to fight your lawyers 3 years ago, she said bluntly. I had the cure. I had the data. I had everything needed to save kids like Marcus. But when Matthew's text shut down my funding, I walked away quietly instead of making noise. You kept working, though, Ariel said, scanning pages of trial results that showed miraculous recoveries in children who'd been written off as terminal cases. In my garage, with my own money, like some crazy scientist in a movie, except the stakes were real kids dying while I tried to prove what I already knew worked. Derek studied photographs of children before and after treatment. Pale, dying faces transformed into healthy, smiling kids who looked like they'd never been sick. The success rate was undeniable. 93% complete recovery within 6 months. The treatment protocol is simple, Dr. Chun continued. Modified stem cell therapy combined with targeted gene editing. We can restart Marcus's bone marrow production within weeks. But I need proper facilities, FDA approval, and corporate backing to do it legally. What's stopping you? Your board of directors. Richard Blackstone, specifically. He's been threatening patent lawsuits, regulatory challenges, anything to keep this research buried. Apparently, admitting the cure exists means admitting Matthew's tech made a mistake shutting it down. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about corporate liability, shareholder lawsuits, and the billions of dollars at stake if other parents realized their children had died from diseases that could have been cured. How many kids? Derek asked quietly. How many what? How many children died because we buried your research? Dr. Chen's face went hard. 47 confirmed cases in the US alone. Probably hundreds more internationally. All preventable with the treatment I developed before you shut down my lab. The number hit like a physical blow. 47 children. 47 families destroyed by corporate decisions made in sterile boardrooms by people who never had to look parents in the eye and explain why profit mattered more than their babies. But here's what they don't know, Dr. Chun continued, pulling out her phone to show them a video call interface. I've been in contact with research teams in Germany, Japan, and Canada. They've been replicating my work independently. The cat's already out of the bag internationally. The US is just behind because of your legal threats. On the screen, 3 other scientists appeared, colleagues who'd continued the research despite American corporate pressure. They looked tired but determined, the kind of people who went into medicine to save lives rather than make money. Dr. Chun has shared her protocols with us. One of them explained, "We've had similar success rates in our trials. The treatment works, Mr. Matthews. The question is whether American children will have access to it, or if they'll have to travel overseas for care their own country could provide." Ariel leaned forward, maternal instinct overriding everything else. "Could you treat Marcus? Right now, today? Not legally in the US. But if you brought him to our facility in Munich, we could begin treatment immediately. Full recovery expected within 4 months. How much would it cost? For Marcus? Nothing. Dr. Chun has funded his treatment through her research grant. But for other American children whose parents can't afford international travel, the unspoken implication hung heavy in the morning air. Rich kids could get cured abroad while poor kids died at home, all because corporate lawyers prioritize liability over lives. Derek's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his assistant. Board meeting called for 8 a.m. Attendance mandatory. Richard wants to discuss your family situation and its impact on company operations. They're moving fast, Dr. Chun observed, reading over his shoulder. Blackstone knows I'm talking to you. He's probably planning to frame this as emotional instability, family drama interfering with business judgment. What do you need from me? Derek asked. Go public. Tell the truth about what happened 3 years ago. Admit the research was buried for financial reasons, not scientific ones. Take responsibility and commit to funding proper trials. That would destroy my company. Maybe. Or maybe it would transform it into something worth saving. Ariel was staring at the photos of cured children, tears streaming down her face. These kids look exactly like Marcus did before he got sick. Happy, healthy, full of life. They were dying 6 months ago, Dr. Chun said gently. Terminal diagnoses, families planning funerals. Now, they're playing soccer and arguing about homework and driving their parents crazy with perfectly normal 10-year-old energy. That could be Marcus. That will be Marcus, if his father finds the courage to do what's right instead of what's profitable. The challenge was clear, but so were the stakes. Derek could save his son and potentially hundreds of other children, but doing so would likely end his career, bankrupt his company, and destroy everything he'd spent 15 years building. His phone rang, Richard Blackstone's distinctive ringtone. Don't answer, Dr. Chun warned. The moment you talk to him, they'll start recording everything for legal purposes. Your words will be twisted, your motivations questioned, your fitness as CEO challenged. But as the phone kept ringing, Derek realized something that surprised him. He didn't care about Richard Blackstone's threats anymore. Didn't care about board meetings or stock prices or shareholder value. He cared about the boy in room 314 who'd spent 4 years writing letters to a father who never responded, who'd figure out how to save himself and still hoped his dad would be proud of him. There's something else, Dr. Chun said, checking her watch nervously. Something I haven't told you about Marcus specifically. What? His blood work shows something unusual. A genetic marker that makes him an ideal candidate not just for treatment, but for developing universal protocols. His recovery could provide the data needed to help thousands of other children. What are you saying? I'm saying your son isn't just another patient, Mr. Matthews. He's potentially the key to curing this disease permanently, but only if he survives long enough to complete the treatment. Have you ever realized that your biggest mistake might also be your chance for redemption? That the thing you're most ashamed of could become the thing that saves everyone? Tell me in the comments what you would choose, safety or courage, reputation or responsibility. Because in 2 hours, Derek would walk into a boardroom full of people determined to silence the truth. And his decision in that room would determine not just Marcus's fate, but the future of every child dying from diseases that could be cured, if only someone had the courage to admit they'd been wrong. He walked into the boardroom knowing it was a trap, but what he discovered there was worse than betrayal. It was the systematic murder of children for profit margins. What would you do if you walked into a room full of people who'd rather let kids die than admit they made a mistake? When corporate loyalty becomes complicity in something evil. The 42nd floor of Matthews Tech felt different at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday that would change everything. The boardroom that had witnessed the birth of a billion-dollar empire was about to host its funeral. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased San Francisco Bay, but the view felt like looking at the world from a prison cell. Derek entered to find the full board assembled. 12 of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley, faces carefully arranged and expressions of concern that didn't reach their eyes. Richard Blackstone sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, silver hair and custom suit radiating the kind of authority that came from destroying careers without breaking a sweat. Derek, sit down. We need to discuss your recent, emotional episode. The phrasing was deliberate, calculated to frame his response to his son's crisis as mental instability rather than parental responsibility. Around the table, board members who'd made fortunes betting on Derek's judgment now looked at him like a liability to be managed. This isn't an emotional episode, Richard. This is about doing the right thing. The right thing. Margaret Singh, the venture capitalist who'd funded their early rounds, laughed coldly. The right thing is protecting shareholder value. The right thing is maintaining the stability that employs 12,000 people and generates billions in revenue. The right thing is admitting we made a mistake. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Board members exchanged glances that communicated volumes. This was worse than they feared. What mistake would that be? Richard's voice carried the soft menace of a predator toying with prey. Biogenesis, the research we buried, the children who died because we prioritized profits over patience. Those trials were terminated due to scientific concerns. Bullshit. The profanity shocked even Derek. He never cursed in board meetings, never showed emotion, never let personal feelings interfere with business decisions. The trials were terminated because you decided 47 dying kids weren't worth the development costs. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Those numbers aren't public, Derek. How exactly did you obtain confidential internal assessments? My 10-year-old son did the research you thought you buried. Turns out dying children have a lot of time to investigate why nobody's trying to save them. Yes, your son. Margaret pulled out a thick folder, legal documents, and private investigator reports spilling across mahogany like evidence at a trial. Let's discuss your recently discovered paternity situation and how it's affecting your judgment. The folder contained everything. Photos of Ariel from 5 years ago, medical records from Marcus's birth, bank statements showing her financial struggles while Derek built his empire. They'd investigated his family like enemy combatants. We know about the surrogacy arrangement she tried to pursue, Richard continued. Know about her financial desperation, her mother's medical bills, her history of seeking wealthy men to solve her problems. That's not. We know she contacted you 3 times in the past 5 years requesting money for various emergencies. Know that you wisely ignored these attempts at extortion. Derek's blood turned to ice. She never contacted me for money. Check your email. Filtered automatically by our corporate security systems to prevent exactly this kind of emotional manipulation. Margaret slid a laptop across the table, screen showing his corporate email account with a folder labeled blocked extortion attempts. Inside were dozens of messages from Ariel over the years. Not requests for money, but simple updates about Marcus's life. First steps, first words, school achievements, medical concerns. A mother trying to keep an absent father connected to his son's life. The latest email was from 6 months ago. Marcus has been diagnosed with aplastic anemia. I'm not asking for financial help. Just thought you should know in case there are family medical history factors the doctors should be aware of. You blocked her, Derek said, voice barely above a whisper. All these years, she was trying to keep me informed about my son, and you blocked every message. We protected you from a clear pattern of manipulation and extortion. She was giving me medical updates about my dying child. A child whose paternity has never been legally established, Richard corrected smoothly. A child whose mother has a documented history of targeting wealthy men during financial crises. Around the table, board members nodded like synchronized swimmers, following Richard's lead with the practiced ease of people who'd rationalized worse things in service of profit margins. But here's what really concerns us, Margaret continued, pulling out another document. Your emotional instability is now threatening a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Biogenesis patents are crucial to our AI development pipeline. If you go public with wild accusations about buried research, you'll destroy not just our reputation, but our technical competitive advantage. What acquisition? Richard smiled like a shark scenting blood. We're selling the biogenesis patents to a Chinese consortium for $8 billion. The deal closes Friday. Your emotional outburst about imaginary dead children could derail the largest transaction in company history. The room spun. Not only had they buried life-saving research, they were now selling it to foreign interests who might never develop treatments for American children. Profit over patients taken to its logical, horrifying conclusion. You can't. We can and we will. Unless you return to your office, forget this family drama and focus on the responsibilities that actually matter. My son is dying. Your alleged son, Margaret corrected, is one child among millions. Your company employs 12,000 people, serves hundreds of millions of customers, generates billions in economic value. Basic math, Derek. 1 versus millions. The casual dismissal of Marcus's life, reducing a 10-year-old boy to a mathematical equation, broke something fundamental inside Derek's chest. These people weren't just colleagues anymore. They were strangers wearing familiar faces, speaking a language of profit and loss that no longer made sense when applied to human lives. What do you want from me? Sign this. Richard slid papers across the table. Legal documents declaring Derek emotionally unstable, temporarily unfit for CEO duties, requiring psychological evaluation before returning to leadership responsibilities. And if I refuse, then we'll do it without your signature. Unanimous board vote removing you for cause, citing erratic behavior and compromised judgment. Your shares get diluted, your reputation gets destroyed, and your imaginary family still doesn't get saved. The trap was perfect, engineered by people who understood that Derek's greatest weakness had always been his need to maintain control. Give up power voluntarily and retain some dignity, or have it taken away and lose everything. But as he stared at the documents that would end his career, Derek realized something that surprised him. He didn't want to control this anymore. Didn't want to be the kind of person who sat in rooms where children's lives were reduced to mathematical equations. He stood up, the motion so sudden that several board members actually flinched. I resign. Derek, don't be rash. Effective immediately. I resign as CEO, as chairman, as a member of this board, and as a shareholder in this company. Richard's face went pale. You can't just. Watch me. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever walked away from something that defined you because it stopped being who you wanted to be? When the cost of staying became higher than the price of leaving? Because what Derek was about to do next would either save his son's life or destroy any chance of redemption. And the whole world was about to learn the difference between Silicon Valley success and human dignity. He called a press conference with no script, no lawyers, and nothing left to lose except the truth that could save his son, or destroy them both trying. Have you ever stood in front of the whole world with nothing but honesty as your weapon? When telling the truth becomes the most dangerous thing you could possibly do. The Marriott Hotel ballroom was packed beyond capacity by 2 p.m. Cameras and reporters and bloggers cramming into every available space like wolves sensing wounded prey. Word had spread through Silicon Valley like wildfire. Derek Matthews, the untouchable tech king, had something to say about his mysterious family and sudden corporate meltdown. Derek stood at the podium in the same clothes he'd worn to the hospital. Wrinkled shirt, loosened tie, looking more human than he had in years. No corporate communications team, no prepared remarks, no legal safety net. Just a father with nothing left to lose except the child he'd already failed. The crowd quieted as he approached the microphone, the kind of expectant silence that preceded either salvation or catastrophe. My name is Derek Matthews. Yesterday morning, I was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. This afternoon, I'm just a father trying to save his son's life. Cameras flashed like lightning as reporters leaned forward, sensing the kind of story that ended careers and started revolutions. 5 years ago, I walked away from a pregnant woman because I was too scared and selfish to be a father. I told myself it was about timing, about not being ready, about protecting my career. The truth is simpler and uglier. I was a coward who chose comfort over courage. His voice was steady, but sweat beaded on his forehead under the hot lights. In the back of the room, he could see Ariel watching from behind hospital security guards, her face unreadable. That woman raised our son alone while I built an empire and pretended he didn't exist. She worked double shifts as a nurse while I collected awards for innovation. She worried about medical bills while I worried about stock prices. And when our son got sick, really sick, I wasn't there. A reporter shouted a question, but Derek kept talking, momentum carrying him past the point of no return. 3 days ago, I got a phone call that changed everything. Marcus, my son, is dying from aplastic anemia. It's a rare blood disorder that destroys bone marrow, and without treatment, children like him have maybe 6 months to live. The room was dead silent now. Even the camera clicks muted by the weight of confession. But here's the part that should shock you. My company owns the cure. 3 years ago, we acquired Biogenesis Labs, a research facility that had developed successful treatments for exactly the disease that's killing my son. We buried that research because it didn't fit our profit projections. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Financial reporters began typing furiously, understanding that this wasn't just personal drama, but potential corporate fraud on a massive scale. 47 children have died in the past 3 years from diseases we could have cured. 47 families destroyed because a boardroom full of adults decided that profit margins mattered more than children's lives. His phone was buzzing incessantly, probably lawyers and former colleagues trying to stop him from finishing what he'd started. He pulled it out, turned it off, and set it on the podium like a man removing shackles. My son figured this out himself. 10 years old, dying in a hospital bed, and he spent his time researching why nobody was trying to save kids like him. He discovered that his own father owned the company that could cure him, and chose not to. Derek's voice cracked on the last words. 5 years of suppressed guilt finally finding voice. Marcus wrote me letters for 4 years. School pictures, report cards, drawings of spaceships and buildings. I never opened them. My corporate security systems sent them back marked return to sender because someone decided that a child's attempts to know his father constituted harassment. A female reporter in the front row was openly crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she held up her phone to record every word. This morning, I read those letters. All of them. And you know what I found? Not anger or resentment or demand for money. I found love. Pure, innocent love from a child who believed his father was a good man doing important work, who just needed to know the truth to make better decisions. He pulled out one of Marcus's letters, hands shaking slightly as he unfolded the careful 10-year-old handwriting. This one says, "Dear Dad, I know you're busy saving the world with computers, but I thought you might want to know I got first place in the science fair for my project about renewable energy. Mom says you care about the environment, so maybe you'd be proud. I hope your work is going good. Love, Marcus." He was 8 when he wrote that. The silence was deafening. Grown professionals wiping their eyes. Hardened journalists struggling to maintain objectivity in the face of raw human pain. I fail my son in every way that matters, but I'm not going to fail him again. Dr. Sarah Chun has developed a treatment protocol that can save Marcus and hundreds of other children. It works, 93% success rate in international trials. But she needs funding, facilities, and corporate backing to make it available in the United States. Derek looked directly into the cameras, knowing that millions of people would see this moment and judge him for the rest of his life. I'm donating my entire stake in Matthews Tech. Every share, every stock option, every penny, to fund pediatric blood disorder research. The Matthews Foundation will ensure that no parent ever has to watch their child die from a disease we know how to cure. The room erupted. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, phones ringing as news organizations scrambled to confirm the biggest tech story of the decade. Derek raised his hand for silence. But there's something else you need to know, something that makes this personal for every parent watching. He paused, knowing that what came next would either save Marcus or destroy any chance of privacy for their family. The Chinese consortium that was supposed to buy our research patents, they're not developing treatments for American children. They're planning to use the technology for military applications, biological weapons research disguised as medical development. Security rushed the stage as the crowd went crazy, but Derek kept talking into the chaos. My former board of directors knew this. They were willing to sell life-saving medical research to foreign military interests for $8 billion while American children died from treatable diseases. 2 security guards reach him now, but instead of stopping him, they stepped back. Even corporate muscle understood when they were witnessing history. If you're a parent watching this, ask yourself, what's your child's life worth? What would you sacrifice to save them? What would you give up to sleep at night, knowing you did everything possible? The crowd was on its feet now, some applauding, others shouting questions, everyone understanding that they just witnessed either the most spectacular corporate suicide in history or the birth of something entirely new. I don't know if my son will forgive me for the 5 years I wasted. I don't know if the world will forgive me for the children who died while I prioritize profits over patients. But I know this. I'd rather spend the rest of my life trying to earn redemption than spend another day pretending that success without soul is worth anything at all. He stepped away from the podium as chaos erupted around him, pushing through crowds of reporters and cameras toward the exit where Ariel waited with tears streaming down her face. When he reached her, she didn't speak, just took his hand and squeezed once. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement that he'd finally chosen courage over comfort. Have you ever burned down your old life to build something worth saving? When everything you thought mattered became less important than the one thing that actually did. Share your story in the comments below, because in the next 24 hours, the world would respond to Derek's confession in ways that would surprise everyone, including the 10-year-old boy in room 314 who was about to become the most famous patient in America. Within 6 hours, his press conference had been viewed 50 million times, but it was his son's response that broke the internet and every heart that watched it. Have you ever seen something so pure that it restored your faith in humanity? When a child's forgiveness becomes more powerful than any corporate apology. The video started simply. A hospital room, medical equipment beeping softly in the background, and a 10-year-old boy propped up against white pillows watching his father's press conference on a tablet. But what happened next turned Marcus Matthews into the most beloved child in America overnight. The nurse recording on her phone had expected to capture a sick kid watching his dad on TV. Instead, she caught the moment when unconditional love met public redemption, when a child's wisdom trumped every adult complexity in the room. "Dad's crying," Marcus said softly as Derek's voice cracked during the press conference. "He looks really sad. Are you angry with him, sweetheart?" the nurse asked gently. Marcus considered this with the serious concentration that had made him figure out corporate conspiracies while other kids play video games. "I was mad for a while," he admitted, especially when the letters kept coming back. But Mom explained that sometimes grown-ups get scared of loving people because love makes you worry about losing them. The tablet showed Derek reading Marcus's letter aloud to millions of viewers, his voice breaking on the words about science fairs and renewable energy, and hoping his dad would be proud. "He kept it," Marcus whispered, wonder filling his voice. "Dad kept my letter. He kept all of them, baby," Ariel said from beside the bed, her own voice thick with emotion. "Really? Even the one with the crayon drawing that got smudged?" "Especially that one." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching his father donate billions of dollars to save children like him. When Derek mentioned the 47 kids who had died, Marcus's face crumpled with the weight of understanding what that number meant. 47 kids? He asked. Kids like me? Kids exactly like you. But they didn't have to die. If Dad's company had kept making the medicine. Ariel nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Marcus processed this information with a moral clarity that adults had spent millions in legal fees trying to obscure. Right and wrong weren't complicated when you were 10 years old and dying from something that could be fixed. Then Dad was wrong, he said simply. But now he's trying to fix it, so that's good. The press conference reached the part where Derek talked about being a coward, about choosing comfort over courage, about failing as a father in every way that mattered. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, studying his father's face with intense concentration. He's not a coward now, though, Marcus said thoughtfully. Cowards don't stand up in front of everybody and say they were wrong. Cowards don't give away all their money to help sick kids. Then came the moment that broke the internet. Can I make a video for Dad? Marcus asked the nurse. I want to tell him something important. What followed was 3 minutes of pure, unfiltered wisdom from a child who understood forgiveness better than any adult in the room. The nurse held up her phone as Marcus looked directly into the camera, for lines visible in his thin arms. Hospital gown, making him look impossibly small and impossibly strong simultaneously. Idat, I just watched your speech, and I want you to know something really important. His voice was weak but clear, carrying the kind of authority that came from staring death in the face and refusing to blink. I'm not mad at you for not reading my letters. I figured out that you were probably scared, and that's okay because being a dad is really hard and scary. I've been scared too, scared of being sick, scared of dying, scared that you didn't want to know me. Tears were streaming down the nurse's face, but she kept recording as Marcus continued with matter-of-fact wisdom that would later be quoted in parenting books and philosophy classes. But you know what? I think scared people just need extra love, not extra blame. And I have lots of love for you, Dad. I always did, even when you couldn't love me back yet. The video showed Marcus reaching under his bed to pull out a fresh piece of paper and a crayon. Hospital supplies that had become his tools for reaching across the gap between abandonment and forgiveness. I'm drawing you a new picture. See? It's us together in your laboratory, making medicine for all the sick kids. Because even though you made mistakes, you're fixing them now. And that's what heroes do in the stories I like. He held up the drawing, stick figures with big smiles, standing next to what looked like medical equipment and hearts floating around them like confetti. Mom says you're giving away all your money to help kids like me. And that makes me really proud. Not because of the money, but because it means you love kids more than dollars. And that's the most important thing a dad can love. The video captured the moment when a 10-year-old boy taught the world about unconditional love, about forgiveness without conditions, about the kind of grace that only comes from hearts too pure to hold grudges. I can't wait to meet you for real, Dad. Not because you're rich or famous or any of that stuff, but because you're my father and I love you, and I think we're going to be really good friends. Marcus waved at the camera with the enthusiasm of a child who just solved the world's most complicated problem with the simplest possible solution: love. Oh, and Dad, don't worry about the medicine. Dr. Chen already called Mom, and she says lots of people want to help now because of your speech. I'm going to get better, and then we can work together to help other kids get better too. That sounds like the best job ever, don't you think? The video ended with Marcus blowing a kiss toward the camera, then settling back against his pillows to color in his drawing while humming softly. A child so focused on tomorrow's possibilities that yesterday's pain couldn't touch him. Within hours, the video had been shared millions of times. Hashtag MarcusStrong became a trending hashtag. Celebrities posted responses. Politicians quoted his wisdom about scared people needing extra love. Medical facilities around the world offered to help with his treatment. But the most important viewer was sitting in a hotel room across town, watching his son's forgiveness on repeat, and finally understanding what unconditional love actually looked like. Tell me in the comments, when was the last time a child taught you something about being human? About forgiveness, courage, or love without conditions. Share how young wisdom changed your perspective, because what happened next would prove that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let a 10-year-old boy show you how to be the parent he always believed you could become. 3 weeks later, Marcus took his first steps without a wheelchair, but what he said to his father in that moment changed both their lives forever. Have you ever watched someone you love come back from the edge of death? When miracle becomes reality and impossible becomes inevitable. The specialized treatment facility in Sacramento looked nothing like the sterile hospital rooms where Marcus had spent the last 6 months dying. Dr. Chun had transformed an entire wing into something that resembled a cross between a medical center and a children's playground. Bright colors, gaming stations, art supplies, and the kind of hope that came from watching terminal children become healthy kids again. Marcus's recovery had been remarkable even by Dr. Chen's standards. The modified stem cell therapy had taken hold within days, his bone marrow responding to treatment like it had been waiting for permission to heal. Blood counts that had been dangerously low were now climbing toward normal ranges. The pale, exhausted child from the ICU was becoming an energetic 10-year-old who complained about hospital food and wanted to know when he could play soccer again. But it was the relationship between father and son that had undergone the most dramatic transformation. Derek had moved to Sacramento the day after his press conference, taking a leave of absence from everything except being present for his child. He'd rented an apartment 2 blocks from the hospital, learned to navigate insurance paperwork and medical terminology, and discovered that being a father was simultaneously the hardest and most natural thing he'd ever done. They'd spent 3 weeks getting to know each other, not as CEO and abandoned child, but as 2 people figuring out how to love each other despite the lost years. Marcus taught Derek about Pokemon and renewable energy projects and why pineapple belonged on pizza. Derek taught Marcus about coding and business strategy and how to calculate compound interest for his allowance. "Dad, can I ask you something serious?" Marcus said on the morning he was finally strong enough to walk unassisted. They were in the facility's garden, morning sun warming their faces as Marcus took careful steps between flower beds, Derek hovering nearby like a nervous bodyguard. "Always, buddy. What's on your mind?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face his father with the kind of direct eye contact that made adults squirm because it saw too much truth. "Why did you really come back? Not just because I was sick, but really why?" The question caught Derek off guard. He'd expected queries about medical procedures or recovery timelines, not psychological excavation from someone who just learned to walk again. "Because you needed me, but I needed you for 10 years, and you didn't come then." The simple honesty cut deeper than any accusation could have. Marcus wasn't trying to hurt him. He was trying to understand the difference between need and response, between crisis and choice. "You're right," Derek said, sitting on a nearby bench so they could talk at eye level. "You needed me for 10 years, and I wasn't brave enough to be needed. I was scared of failing you, so I decided it was better to not try at all. But that meant you failed me anyway." "Yeah, it did." Marcus considered this with the serious concentration he brought to everything important. "So what changed? What made you not scared anymore?" Derek looked at his son, really looked at him, taking in the intelligence that had unraveled corporate conspiracies, the forgiveness that had taught millions about unconditional love, the strength that had faced death without losing hope. "You did. Reading your letters, seeing how smart and kind and amazing you turned out despite having a father who was too cowardly to know you. I realized I wasn't protecting you from my failures. I was missing out on your successes. And now I'm still scared, terrified, actually. Every day, I worry about messing this up, about not being the father you deserve, about letting you down again." Marcus took a few more careful steps, testing his strength against the ground, then settled beside Derek on the bench with the satisfied sigh of someone who just accomplished something impossible. "Good," he said simply. "Being scared means you care. Mom always said that brave people aren't the ones who don't get scared. They're the ones who do the right thing even when they're terrified." The wisdom of that statement, delivered so casually by a 10-year-old in Pokemon pajamas, hit Derek like revelation. All these years, he'd been waiting to feel confident about fatherhood, when what Marcus needed was just someone willing to show up scared and try anyway. "There's something else I want to tell you," Marcus continued, reaching into his pocket to pull out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote you another letter, but this one's different." "Different how?" "It's not trying to get your attention anymore. It's just thanking you." Derek took the letter with hands that trembled slightly, unfolding careful 10-year-old handwriting that had evolved from crayon to pen, from hopeful child to wise young man. "Dear Dad," he read aloud, "thank you for saving my life. Not just with the medicine, but with the truth. When you stood up in front of all those cameras and said you were wrong, you saved 47 kids who died, and probably thousands more who won't have to die now. That makes you a hero, even if you don't feel like one yet." Derek's voice caught, but Marcus gestured for him to keep reading. "I know you think you failed me for 10 years, but you didn't. You gave me the best mom in the world. You gave me your brain so I could figure out problems, and you gave me your stubborn streak so I didn't give up when things got hard. Most importantly, you gave me a story that proves people can change. People can choose love over fear, and families can happen at any age." The letter continued with Marcus's plans for their future, working together on medical research, traveling to meet kids who've been helped by the foundation, maybe starting a company that put helping people ahead of making money. "I'm not mad about the lost time anymore, Dad. I'm excited about the time we have left. Because now when people ask me about my father, I don't have to say, I don't know. I can say, he's the man who chose love over money, truth over comfort, and his son over everything else. That's a pretty cool dad to have." The letter ended with, "P.S. Mom says you've been asking about her a lot. I think you should ask her on a date. She pretends she's too busy, but I see her smiling when she talks about you. Just saying. Love, Marcus, your son, your partner, your biggest fan." Derek folded the letter carefully, understanding that he was holding something more valuable than any corporate contract he'd ever signed. "Marcus, I need to tell you something too." "What?" "You're not just my son, you're my teacher. You've taught me more about courage and forgiveness and what actually matters in 3 weeks than I learned in 33 years before that." Marcus grinned, the first completely unguarded, purely happy expression Derek had seen from him. "Does that mean I get extra allowance for being a good teacher?" "It means you get a father who's going to spend the rest of his life trying to deserve the son he was lucky enough to find." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other children in various stages of recovery play in the garden. Kids who would live because of Marcus's research, because of Derek's confession, because sometimes doing the right thing late was better than never doing it at all. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy. Will you teach me how to run a company?" "Not the money part. I already understand that. The part about making decisions that help people instead of hurt them." "You want to run a company?" "Someday. The Marcus and Derek Matthews Foundation for Kids Who Need Medicine. We can make it the biggest, most helpful company in the world." The vision hit Derek with unexpected force. Not just reconciliation with his son, but partnership in something meaningful. A legacy built on healing instead of profit, connection instead of competition. That sounds like the best business plan I've ever heard. Really? But first, we need to get you completely healthy. Dr. Chun says you'll be ready for discharge next week. And then what? Derek looked at his son, brilliant, forgiving, full of plans for a future they'd build together, and realized he knew exactly what came next. "Then we go home, all 3 of us, and we start over, but this time we do it right." Marcus's smile could have powered the entire medical facility. "Will you ask Mom on that date now? Only if you promise to give me advice about what she likes." "Deal." "But Dad, what now? She already loves you again. She just needs to know you're planning to stay this time. Tell me in the comments. What would you do if you got a second chance to build the family you should have created the first time? When redemption becomes possible, how do you make sure you don't waste the miracle?" Because what Derek didn't know was that Ariel had been listening from the garden doorway, tears streaming down her face as she watched the 2 most important men in her life discover what it meant to be father and son. And her answer to his unasked question was already yes. Had been yes since the moment he chose courage over comfort, truth over safety, love over everything else that used to matter. The Matthews family was about to begin for real. 6 months later, Derek was teaching Marcus advanced calculus when Ariel walked into their shared office wearing a wedding dress, but not for the reason anyone expected. Have you ever built something so beautiful that you were afraid to believe it was real? When second chances become forever chances, and broken families become stronger than they ever were whole. The Matthews Foundation headquarters buzzed with controlled chaos on a Tuesday morning that felt like Christmas and graduation rolled into one. The converted warehouse in downtown Sacramento hummed with pediatric researchers, medical equipment, and the kind of hopeful energy that came from saving children's lives for a living. Marcus sat at his own desk, official title Chief Research Consultant, reviewing treatment protocols with a serious concentration of someone who understood that details meant the difference between life and death for kids like him. At 11 years old, he became the youngest person ever to co-author a paper in the Journal of Pediatric Medicine. But more importantly, he'd become living proof that impossible recoveries were just undiscovered possibilities. "Dad, look at this," he said, pulling up data on his tablet. Dr. Chen's new treatment protocol is showing 97% success rates in international trials. We could help almost every kid with blood disorders now. Derek looked up from quarterly budget reports, a very different kind of financial planning than his Silicon Valley days. Instead of maximizing profit margins, he was calculating how many children they could save with each dollar donated, how many families they could keep whole, how many futures they could rescue from diseases that no longer had to be terminal. That's incredible, buddy. How many kids are we talking about? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands worldwide. And Dad, the treatment costs are dropping because more hospitals want to participate. It's like the more we help, the easier it gets to help more. The simple beauty of that observation, that good work created momentum for more good work, reminded Derek why walking away from corporate life had been the easiest decision he'd ever made. Success measured in lives saved felt infinitely more valuable than success measured in dollars accumulated. There's something else, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the excitement that came with solving problems that mattered. I've been working with Dr. Chen on a prediction algorithm. We can identify at-risk children earlier, start treatment before they get really sick. You developed an algorithm? We developed it together. Turns out all that time I spent learning about business analytics was perfect training for medical research. Who knew math could be used to save lives instead of just make money? The proud smile that spread across Derek's face felt like sunshine after years of rain. His son wasn't just surviving. He was thriving, using his brilliant mind to help other children avoid the terror he'd experienced. The boy who'd almost died from a treatable disease was now helping cure that same disease for kids around the world. That's when Ariel appeared in the doorway, and everything stopped. She wore a simple white dress that made her look exactly like the woman Derek had fallen in love with 6 years ago in Atlanta, but with something new, a confidence that came from building a life worth living, a strength that came from surviving the worst and discovering it hadn't broken her. "Mom, you look beautiful," Marcus said, immediately understanding what the dress meant. "Is today the day?" "Today's the day," she confirmed, moving into the office with the grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. "That is, if your father is ready to make an honest woman out of me." Derek's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. They've been talking about marriage for months, careful conversations about second chances and blended families, and whether two people who'd failed at love once could build something lasting the second time around. "Are you proposing to me?" he asked, standing up from his desk with the kind of nervous energy he hadn't felt since their first night together in Atlanta. "I'm accepting your proposal," she replied, pulling a small velvet box from her purse. "The one you've been carrying around for 3 weeks, but haven't had the courage to actually make." Marcus laughed out loud, the sound of pure joy echoing through the office. "Dad, she totally caught you. You've been practicing that speech in the bathroom mirror every morning. You knew about the ring? Mom knows everything. It's like her superpower. Plus, you're not as sneaky as you think you are." Ariel moved closer, close enough that Derek could smell the perfume that still made his pulse stutter, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes that appeared when she was completely happy. "Derek Matthews," she said formally, You spent 6 months proving that people can change, that love can heal, that families can happen at any age. You've shown our son what it means to choose courage over fear, truth over comfort, and commitment over convenience. She paused, reaching up to touch his face with fingers that still sent electricity straight to his nervous system. So, I have a question for you. Anything, will you marry me? Not because I need rescuing, not because Marcus needs a father figure, but because we love each other and want to build something beautiful together. The question hung in the air like a promise, surrounded by the sound of medical equipment, saving lives, and researchers changing the world, and their son giggling at his parents' obvious nervousness about something that had been inevitable since the moment Derek chose his family over his empire. Yes, he said simply, then louder, yes, absolutely yes. Marcus cheered as Derek pulled the ring box from his jacket pocket, the one he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment that had just created itself. But I had a whole speech planned, Derek protested as he slipped the ring onto Ariel's finger, a simple platinum band that somehow made everything feel official and permanent and wonderfully, terrifyingly real. Save it for the wedding, she laughed, stretching up to kiss him with the kind of passion that reminded him why he'd fallen so hard 6 years ago and why he'd never really stopped falling. When's the wedding? Marcus asked practically. Right now, Ariel said against Derek's lips. Dr. Chin's waiting in the conference room with a minister. The entire research staff is there as witnesses, and I've already ordered cake from that bakery you like. You planned our entire wedding? I planned the ceremony. The marriage is something we build together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, for the rest of our lives. The kiss that followed tasted like promises and second chances, and the kind of love that survived abandonment and illness and corporate scandals to become something stronger than it had ever been before. Okay, this is getting gross, Marcus announced. Can we go get married now, so I can eat cake? Tell me in the comments. What does forever look like when you've already survived the worst? When second chances become the foundation for something better than what you lost? Share your thoughts about building love on the foundation of forgiveness. Because what happened next would prove that some families aren't born. They're chosen, fought for, and built by people brave enough to believe that love is always worth the risk. The wedding ceremony lasted 15 minutes, but the vows they made would echo through the lives of every child they saved for the next 50 years. Have you ever made promises that you knew would change not just your life, but the world? When personal commitment becomes public purpose and love becomes legacy. The Foundation's conference room had been transformed with simple elegance. White flowers from the facility's garden, string lights that Marcus had helped hang, and chairs arranged in a circle so everyone felt included rather than separated into audiences and performers. 60 people filled the space. Medical researchers, former patients, hospital staff, and the kind of chosen family that forms around shared purpose and mutual respect. Dr. Sarah Chan stood at the front, beaming with the satisfaction of someone who'd watched impossible become inevitable through sheer determination and refusal to accept that children had to die from treatable diseases. She'd officiated dozens of ceremonies during her years as a small-town minister before medical school, but this one felt especially meaningful, uniting not just 2 people, but 3 lives that had been broken apart and rebuilt into something beautiful. Marcus sat in the front row wearing his first real suit, a ring-bearer's box in his lap, and pride radiating from every molecule of his being. The boy who'd written letters to an absent father was now witnessing his parents' marriage, family formation happening in real time through choice rather than biology. Dearly beloved, Dr. Chen began, we gather today not just to witness a wedding, but to celebrate the kind of love that transforms everything it touches, families, communities, and the world itself. Ariel stood facing Derek in a dress that cost less than his old business lunches, but made her look more beautiful than any designer gown ever could. Her hands were steady, her smile was radiant, and her eyes held the kind of certainty that came from surviving the worst and choosing hope anyway. 6 years ago, Dr. Chun continued, these 2 people fell in love in Atlanta and created something precious. Not just Marcus, but the possibility of a family built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Life separated them, fear divided them, but love brought them back together stronger than before. Derek felt nervous in a way he'd never experienced during corporate presentations or board meetings. This mattered more than any business deal, carried higher stakes than any financial decision, promised more joy and terror than anything he'd ever committed to before. The vows you make today aren't just to each other, Dr. Chen said, but to the family you're choosing to become and the community you're promising to serve. Derek, would you like to go first? He looked at Ariel, then at Marcus, then at the faces around them. People who'd watched him transform from absent father to devoted parent, from corporate executive to humanitarian, from someone who measured success in dollars to someone who measured it in lives saved. Ariel, he began, voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. 6 years ago, I was too scared to love you the way you deserved. I chose safety over courage, comfort over commitment, myself over us. I failed you in every way that mattered. He paused, seeing tears in her eyes, but also forgiveness, understanding, and the kind of love that survived even the worst mistakes. But you never failed me. You raised our son to be brilliant and kind and forgiving. You taught him that scared people need extra love, not extra blame. You showed him what unconditional love looks like by loving me even when I couldn't love myself enough to stay. Around the room, people were openly crying. Researchers who'd seen Derek's transformation, former patients who understood the power of second chances, staff members who'd watched a broken family become whole again through choice and commitment. Today, I promise you something different. I promise to choose courage over fear, truth over comfort, us over everything else that tries to pull us apart. I promise to be the husband you deserve, the father Marcus needs, and the partner who helps you build the life you've always dreamed of. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a second ring, not just a wedding band, but something he'd had custom made with Marcus's help. I also promise to love our family, not just the two of us, but the three of us, the chosen family we've created, and every child we save together. This ring has 3 stones, one for each of us, because marriage isn't just about 2 people anymore. It's about the family we choose to become. Ariel was crying openly now, but her voice was strong when she began her own vows. Derek, I fell in love with you twice. Once in Atlanta when you were young and ambitious and afraid of forever. And again in Sacramento when you chose our son over your empire, truth over safety, love over everything else you thought mattered. She looked at Marcus, who was grinning so hard his face might split in half. The first time I loved your potential. The second time I loved your character. Today I'm marrying both. The man you were and the man you've become. The father you are and the partner you've chosen to be. Her voice grew stronger, carrying the authority of someone who'd survived single motherhood and medical crises and corporate scandals to build something beautiful on the other side. I promise to love you through success and failure, health and sickness, the easy days and the impossible ones. I promise to be your partner in parenting, your ally in purpose, and your safe place when the world gets too heavy to carry alone. She turned to include Marcus in her gaze. I promise to love our family, all 3 of us, with the fierce protectiveness that kept me going during the hardest years and the gentle tenderness that makes the good years even better. We're not just getting married today. We're choosing to become the family we always should have been. Dr. Chen stepped forward with rings that would symbolize promises kept and futures built on the foundation of forgiveness. By the power vested in me by the state of California and the community that loves you, I now pronounce you husband and wife, partners in purpose, and parents in the truest sense of the word. The kiss that followed was witnessed by 60 people, but felt private and sacred, a moment when 2 people who'd loved and lost and found each other again sealed their commitment with the kind of passion that survives everything life throws at it. Marcus jumped up from his seat, applauding with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just watched his biggest dream come true. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Chen announced, I present to you the Matthews family, Proof that love is always worth fighting for. Families can be built at any age, and some promises are worth keeping forever. Tell me in the comments, what promises would you make if you got a second chance at forever? When love survives the worst, what does commitment look like the second time around? Because what happened next would test every vow they'd just made, challenge every promise they'd sworn to keep, and prove that some families are strong enough to handle anything the world throws at them. 2 years into their marriage, a medical emergency tested everything they'd built. But this time, they faced the storm together as a family that nothing could break. Have you ever discovered that your greatest strength comes from surviving your worst fear? When crisis becomes the moment that proves love is stronger than anything that tries to destroy it. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday that started like any other, but would end up defining the rest of their lives. Derek answered on the second ring, instantly alert in the way that parents learn when their children's lives depend on quick responses to middle-of-the-night emergencies. Mr. Matthews? This is Dr. Rodriguez from Children's Hospital. We have Marcus here, and you need to come immediately. The world tilted. Marcus had been at a sleepover with his best friend Jake, celebrating the end of 7th grade with the kind of innocent fun that made Derek grateful his son could be a normal kid despite everything they'd survived together. What happened? Ariel was already getting dressed, moving with the efficient panic of a nurse who understood that medical emergencies waited for no one. Galaxy Dome. The family was coming back from a movie when a drunk driver ran a red light. Marcus is stable, but he's asking for you both, and there are some complications we need to discuss. They drove to the hospital in the kind of terrified silence that comes when everything you've built feels fragile enough to shatter with one wrong word. The foundation was thriving, their marriage was solid, Marcus was healthy and happy and brilliant. But none of that mattered if their 13-year-old son was lying in an ICU fighting for his life again. The pediatric ward brought back memories neither of them wanted to revisit. The smell of antiseptic and hope, the sound of machines keeping children alive, the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone whose life hangs in the balance. Dr. Rodriguez met them at the nurse's station, her face carrying the careful neutrality that medical professionals used when delivering news that could go either way. Marcus is conscious and stable, she said immediately, understanding that parents needed the most important information first. He has a concussion, some bruised ribs, and a broken wrist, but those will heal completely. But Derek could hear the unspoken complication in her voice. The accident triggered something we didn't expect. His blood work is showing some concerning changes. Nothing like his original condition, but his immune system took a major hit from the trauma. We need to monitor him closely for the next few weeks. They found Marcus in room 237, looking small against white sheets, but alert and apologetic in the way that kids get when they think they've caused trouble by getting hurt. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry," he said before they could even speak. "I know you were worried, and I hate that I scared you guys." Ariel sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle his injured arm, and smoothed his hair back from his forehead with the gentle touch that had comforted him through every crisis since birth. "Baby, you have nothing to apologize for. Accidents happen, and the important thing is that you're okay. But what if I'm not okay? What if being sick before made me weaker? What if—" "Hey," Derek interrupted, pulling a chair close to the bed so he could look his son directly in the eye. "Remember what we learned 3 years ago? Fear makes us imagine the worst possible outcomes. But love makes us focus on what we can control. What can we control this time? We can control being here together. We can control making sure you get the best possible care. We can control loving each other through whatever comes next." Marcus considered this with the serious concentration that had made him a brilliant research partner and an even better son. "And if something bad happens anyway, then we handle it as a family," Ariel said simply. "The 3 of us, together, like we've handled everything else." The next 2 weeks tested every promise they'd made at their wedding and every strength they'd built as a family. Marcus's recovery was complicated by an infection that wouldn't respond to standard antibiotics, requiring the kind of specialized treatment that few hospitals could provide. But this time was different. This time, Derek didn't run from the medical complexity or hide behind corporate responsibilities. This time, Ariel didn't carry the burden alone or pretend she didn't need support. This time, they functioned as a team, taking shifts at the hospital, researching treatment options together, making medical decisions as partners rather than desperate individuals. You know what's weird? Marcus said during his second week in the hospital, looking out the window at Sacramento, spring sunshine he couldn't yet enjoy. "What's that, buddy?" "I'm not as scared this time. Not because this is less serious, but because I know we're going to figure it out together. When I was little and sick before, I felt like I was fighting alone even though Mom was always there. This time feels different. Different how? Like we're a team. Like whatever happens, we'll handle it as the Matthews family. And that makes everything less scary." The simple wisdom of that observation, that family wasn't just about biology or even love, but about choosing to face life's challenges as a unified force, reminded Derek why building this relationship had been worth every sacrifice he'd made. Plus, Marcus continued with a grin that reminded them both that underneath the medical crisis, he was still a 13-year-old with a teenager sense of humor. "If something really bad happens, at least I know my parents are madly in love with each other. That's got to count for something in the cosmic balance of things." Madly in love? Ariel laughed, the first genuine joy they'd heard from her in 2 weeks. "Oh please, you guys are disgusting. Always holding hands and making googly eyes at each other. It's embarrassing how cute you are." "We're not that bad," Derek protested. "Dad, last week I caught you two slow dancing in the kitchen to no music. That's next level ridiculous." The laughter that filled the hospital room felt like medicine. The kind that healed more than bodies, that strengthened more than immune systems, that proved some things were worth fighting for no matter how scary the battle became. Marcus's infection finally responded to treatment on day 16, his immune system rebuilding with the resilience that had carried him through his original illness and would carry him through whatever challenges lay ahead. But more importantly, they'd proven something to themselves and each other. The family they'd built was strong enough to handle anything life threw at them, because it was built on choice rather than obligation, commitment rather than convenience, love rather than everything else that seemed important but ultimately wasn't. Tell me in the comments, what crisis taught you the most about your own strength? When everything you love is threatened, how do you discover what really matters? Share how challenges became the foundation for something stronger. Because what they were about to face next would test not just their family bond, but their ability to change the world while staying true to each other and the promises that had brought them together. 5 years after their wedding, Marcus graduated high school as valedictorian, but his graduation speech about his parents taught the world what redemption really looks like. Have you ever watched someone you love become everything you hoped they could be? When your greatest failure becomes the foundation for someone else's greatest success, and love becomes legacy. The Sacramento Convention Center buzzed with the excited energy of 847 graduating seniors and their families. But all eyes were on the young man at the podium whose story had inspired millions and whose future promised to change everything. Marcus Matthews stood 18 years old and confident, no longer the sick child fighting for his life, but not yet fully the man he was becoming. He wore his cap and gown with the same serious dignity he'd brought to everything since childhood. But there was something new, a quiet authority that came from knowing exactly what he wanted to do with the life his parents had helped him reclaim. Fellow graduates, families, friends, he began, voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. They asked me to give a speech about our futures, about the dreams we're chasing and the lives we're building. But I can't talk about my future without talking about my past. And I can't talk about my past without talking about redemption. In the audience, Derek and Ariel sat holding hands like teenagers, watching their son command the attention of thousands of people with the same intelligence and heart that had figured out corporate conspiracies and taught adults about unconditional love. 18 years ago, my father made the worst decision of his life. He walked away from my pregnant mother because he was scared and selfish and thought his comfort mattered more than our family. For the first 10 years of my life, I had a dad who didn't want to know me. The auditorium was dead silent, everyone understanding they were witnessing something rare, complete honesty from someone young enough to believe truth could change the world. When I was 10, I got sick. Really sick. The kind of sick where doctors use words like terminal and prepare for the worst. My mom called my dad, not because she wanted his money or his pity, but because I was dying and he was the only one who could save me. Marcus looked directly at his parents, seeing tears streaming down both their faces, but also pride that made his chest tight with love and purpose. My father had spent 5 years denying I existed, but when he learned I was dying, he didn't hesitate. He left his billion-dollar company, drove 6 hours through the night, and walked into a hospital room to meet the son he'd been too cowardly to love. The crowd was mesmerized, hanging on every word of a story they thought they knew but were hearing from a completely new perspective. But here's what I learned about redemption. It's not about erasing your mistakes. It's about choosing to do better every day for the rest of your life. My dad couldn't change the 10 years he missed, but he could change every day after that. Marcus paused, looking out at an audience that included former patients of the foundation, researchers whose work was saving lives around the world, and parents whose children were alive because of the treatment protocols developed in their facility. My dad gave up his empire to save my life. He exposed corporate fraud, donated his fortune to medical research, and spent the last 8 years proving that success without soul is worthless, but love with purpose can change everything. The applause was thunderous, but Marcus held up his hand for silence. My mom spent 10 years raising me alone, working double shifts to keep us afloat, protecting me from the truth that my father didn't want us. But she never taught me to hate him. Instead, she taught me that scared people need extra love, not extra blame. She taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you can choose. Ariel was openly sobbing now, the kind of tears that come when your child becomes a better person than you ever imagined possible. Together, my parents built something beautiful on the foundation of their worst mistakes. The Matthews Foundation has saved over 3,000 children's lives in the past 8 years. But more than that, they've shown me what it means to choose love over fear, purpose over profit, family over everything else that seems important but ultimately isn't. Marcus looked directly at his parents again, seeing the people who'd shaped him into someone capable of changing the world. So, when people ask me about my future, about my dreams and plans and ambitions, here's what I tell them. I want to be exactly like my parents. Not perfect, they're not perfect, but committed to growing, learning, choosing love even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but Marcus wasn't finished yet. Next fall, I'm starting pre-med at Stanford with plans to specialize in pediatric hematology. I want to continue the work my parents started, expand the research that saved my life, and make sure no child ever has to die from a disease we know how to cure. The crowd erupted again, understanding they were witnessing the birth of someone who would spend his life giving back to the world that had given him a second chance. But mostly, I want to build the kind of family my parents built. One where mistakes become opportunities to do better, where fear gets transformed into courage, where love wins over everything that tries to destroy it. As the ceremony concluded and caps flew into the air like confetti, Derek and Ariel made their way through the crowd to reach their son, who was surrounded by well-wishers and reporters and future classmates who understood they just heard from someone destined for greatness. When they finally reached him, Marcus hugged them both with the fierce love of someone who understood exactly how precious family could be when you'd almost lost it forever. "I'm proud of you," Derek said, voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of us," Marcus corrected. "All 3 of us. We built something pretty amazing, didn't we?" "We did," Ariel agreed. "And we're just getting started. Tell me in the comments, what legacy are you building with your second chances? When your children become your teachers, how do you make sure their wisdom changes the world? Share what you hope your love will create long after you're gone. Because what happened next would prove that some families don't just survive their mistakes. They transform them into gifts that keep giving for generations to come. 25 years after that first terrifying phone call, Derek Matthews stood in a different hospital room. But this time he was holding his grandson, and the circle of love and redemption was finally complete. Have you ever held the future in your arms and realized that every mistake you made, every loss you survived, every choice you regretted led to this perfect moment? When love becomes legacy, and legacy becomes eternal. The maternity ward at UC San Francisco Medical Center buzzed with the quiet efficiency of a place where miracles happen daily, but room 312 felt like the center of the universe. Marcus, now 35 and head of pediatric research at the hospital where he'd once been treated, sat beside his wife Elena, holding their newborn son with the careful reverence of someone who understood how precious life could be. Derek stood by the window, silver-haired now, but still strong at 58, watching his son become a father and remembering his own terror at this same moment 25 years ago. This time felt different, not because the stakes were lower, but because they were higher in all the right ways. "Dad, want to meet your grandson?" Marcus asked, voice soft with wonder and exhaustion and joy so pure it filled the room like light. Derek approached the bed with careful steps, seeing his own eyes reflected in both his son and the tiny perfect face of the baby who represented everything they'd built together. Family, purpose, love that survived every test life could devise. "What's his name?" Ariel asked, settling into the chair beside Elena with the comfortable ease of women who'd become true friends through shared love of the same extraordinary man. "David Derek Matthews," Elena said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "David for my father, and Derek because some names deserve to be honored by the next generation." Derek's throat closed, the baby in his arms, warm and perfect and completely innocent, carried his name, but more importantly carried the legacy of choices made right. Love chosen over fear, redemption earned through decades of daily commitment to being better. "He's beautiful," Derek whispered, studying tiny fingers that would someday save lives, a small face that would grow up in a world where family meant something unbreakable, where love was the foundation instead of the afterthought. "Look at his hands," Marcus said proudly. Elena swears he's already showing signs of analytical thinking. "Born to be a researcher, just like his dad and grandfather." "Born to be loved," Ariel corrected gently. "Everything else is just details." They sat in comfortable silence, for adults and one baby who represented the culmination of everything they'd fought for, lost, found, and built together. The Matthews Foundation had expanded internationally, saving thousands of children's lives. Marcus had become one of the world's leading pediatric researchers. Derek and Ariel's marriage had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. But this, holding his grandson while surrounded by the family he'd almost thrown away, felt like the real victory. "I need to tell you both something," Marcus said, looking at his parents with a serious expression that meant important conversation was coming. "Elena and I have been talking about David's future, about the kind of world we want him to grow up in." "What kind of world is that?" Derek asked, though he suspected he already knew. "One where children don't die from preventable diseases, where medical research serves humanity instead of profit margins, where families like ours, complicated, imperfect, built on second chances, are celebrated instead of judged." Marcus reached for his wife's hand, the gesture so natural and loving that it reminded Derek of his own relationship with Ariel, partnership that had been tested by everything life could throw at it and emerged unbreakable. "We want David to grow up in the family business. Not tech or finance, but hope. We want him to understand that his grandfather chose love over money, that his grandmother never gave up on people she believed in, that his parents built their lives around serving others. The family business of hope," Ariel repeated softly. "I like that." Baby David stirred in Derek's arms, making the soft sounds that newborns make when they're perfectly content and completely safe. Looking down at his grandson, Derek saw the future. Not just his family's future, but the world's future shaped by people who understood that love was always worth fighting for. "You know what's amazing?" he said, voice full of wonder. 25 years ago, I was the worst father in the world. Scared, selfish, too cowardly to love the people who needed me most. I almost destroyed the best things in my life because I couldn't imagine being worthy of them. He looked at Marcus, then at Ariel, then at Elena, who'd welcomed him into her family despite knowing his complicated history. But you taught me something I never expected to learn. Redemption isn't about erasing your mistakes. It's about choosing to do better every day, loving people despite your fears, building something beautiful on the foundation of everything you got wrong the first time. Baby David opened his eyes, dark brown like his father's, like his grandfather's, and seemed to focus on Derek's face with the intense attention that newborns sometimes show, as if they're memorizing the first faces they see. This little guy is going to grow up knowing he's loved unconditionally, Derek continued. He's going to have parents who choose courage over fear, grandparents who model commitment over convenience, and a family legacy built on the radical idea that love can survive anything if you're willing to fight for it. What are you thinking about, Dad? Marcus asked. I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you taught me to be brave enough for forever. How proud I am of the man you became despite having me as a father for the first 10 years. How lucky I am that your mother never gave up on the possibility that people can change. And now I get to watch you be the father I should have been from the beginning. I get to see David grow up in a family where love is the foundation instead of the afterthought. I get to know that every mistake I made, every year I wasted, every choice I regretted led to this moment. Holding my grandson while surrounded by the family that love built. As if responding to his grandfather's voice, baby David made a soft sound that might have been contentment or might have been agreement. Either way, it felt like blessing, approval from the next generation for the choices that had brought them all to this perfect, imperfect, absolutely beautiful moment. Welcome to the Matthews family, David, Ariel said softly. Where second chances become forever chances, where mistakes become wisdom, and where love always wins. Tell me in the comments, what would you want your legacy to be? If your children and grandchildren told stories about you, what would you want those stories to say? How do you want to be remembered by the people who matter most? Because love isn't just what we feel, it's what we build, what we choose, what we pass down to generations who will carry our best decisions forward and learn from our worst ones. The Matthews family learned that redemption is possible, that families can be built at any age, and that some love stories don't end. They just keep getting better. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe for more stories about love, redemption, and the families we choose to build. And remember, it's never too late to choose courage over fear, love over comfort, and family over everything else that seems important but ultimately isn't. What would you sacrifice for the people you love? How far would you go to earn redemption? Tell me in the comments what this story meant to you. And don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear that broken families can become beautiful ones when love is the foundation. Until next time, keep believing in second chances. Keep fighting for love. And keep building families that prove some bonds are stronger than blood. They're forged by choice, commitment, and the courage to never give up on each other.